Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Higginbotham. Welcome to this morning's Cyber Loss Prevention Forum webinar. I'm delighted to be here in RiskWorks head office here in Wilmslow. So without further ado, let's get underway. First of all, introduction. So I'm Richard Higginbotham. I'm Product and Professional Services Director at Vault Connect. So we secure and automate critical processes. And with me today is Jonathan.
Good morning, I'm John Davis from RiskWorks Business Services. We're commercial insurance brokers, and my area is cyber insurance. So this morning, the event will run through the normal pattern. We'll try and talk for about 30 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. So that should mean you'll be away for about 11:45. If you've got any questions during the webinar, use the Q&A button, and we'll try and answer any we can there and then. But if not, we'll try and get some at the end. And any we can't answer, we'll circulate the full response afterwards. And lastly, a recording of the webinar will be available on demand after the event. So, Invoice Hijack, Richard. Why do they do it?
Well, I guess to bend Sutton's law, which is Willie Sutton was asked why he robbed banks and replied quite simply, because that's where the money is. Is people target the invoice process because you just think about how many businesses are processing how many invoices from Lord knows how many suppliers every month. It's a lucrative area. I guess it's one that you see growing all the time. Massively.
Insurers' statistics suggest that around about 80% of claims come from simple human error. So from a scammer's point of view, it's simple law of numbers. For every however many thousand emails they sent out, they effectively only need one or two to bite, and it becomes financially viable for them.
It's a huge cost for the victims as well.
Yes, not only, I suppose, when you're looking at invoice hijack, it's not the actual money itself that's gone. There's also a wealth of hidden costs that you might incur in terms of looking at how your system's been hacked, investigating it, patching it up. If there's potential data breaches, then you're getting into potential third-party claims, advising people that their data may have been stolen or lost along the way, and then obviously things like GDPR and advising the ICO of any actual data breach. It can become quite a costly exercise.
It is, and it's those losses are difficult to recover, aren't they? Is if you or one of your team has put that money into a fraudster's bank account, as we touched on in our earlier webinar when Stephen from HRC Law came in and talked through just such a case, is recovering those funds are nigh on impossible.
Yeah, exactly that. I suppose from a fraudster's point of view, the money just gets put into the ether, gets circulated from account to account, it goes around the world.
Yeah,
the money's gone. It's as simple as that.
And meanwhile, there's a supplier there waiting to get paid.
So there's two people that have effectively lost.
Yeah,
from a scammer, but obviously the scammer's point of view, they're just interested in the financial gain, but the repercussions of that are quite massive.
So, talking about scale and size, is the FBI keep a measure on this type of crime globally. I think that they've been measuring this for around about 4 or 5 years, but in July 2018, global losses to this particular pattern of fraud passed $12.5 billion globally. Let's bring it a little bit closer to home. Action Fraud, which is the UK police financial and internet crime body, they saw a 123% increase in losses last financial year. So that wasn't just attacks, that's people who made payments and not been able to recover them. The typical loss is about £20,000. So that's
remarkable, isn't it?
That's significant. And Symantec, the internet security specialists, they're categoric in this, is 91% of those attacks start with an email. So it's fraudsters using tools that we trust to get us to do things that they want us to do.
Correct.
So business email compromise is the technical term, but it takes a number of guises. So at its most primitive, it's spoofing.
Yeah, but I think in addition to that, I mean, spoofing is your typical numbers game email where you receive an email suggesting you might have won a national lottery in a far off land. But the sophistication levels have gone that one step further. Now we're seeing a lot of direct falsified invoice type fraud,
Yep.
which I suppose is where you come in that sense, and what you offer.
And I guess with that is really is at its most primitive. If I know that you are supplied by a company and I can create an email that looks like it comes from that company containing an invoice that looks like it comes from that company, it's a numbers game. There's a chance that you'll pay it. And that, I mean, thankfully, that has been largely dialed out now as people have become more aware of the threat. And so people, but again, it's process that provides the security. So you've got the basic deception, and then there's a little bit more intelligent deception of understanding who's who and what happens and preying on those behaviors a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, to give you a couple of examples from the things I've seen, I mean, CEO fraud again is quite on the rise, and I think a lot of the hackers are using not necessarily just sort of hacking methods, but it's a lot of technology, so social engineering and gleaming information by perfectly legal means through social media, things like that. So, one example I can give you is CEO of a company received an email at his work, and then the hackers had obviously done some digging. They were aware of what golf club he was a member of, and they'd obviously know their particular calendar. He received an invite to the inaugural annual dinner, etc. Please fill in your details here and payment. And it was a spoof. He was, before he realised what had happened, he'd signed up for 2 tickets. He thought, but he hadn't. He was $5,000 down.
Yep. And it's easily done. And you also have I guess we've all worked for them. The big boss is, if the big boss comes to your desk and says, I've got a problem, is I forgot to set up this supplier and they're now crying out for the money. If that's done remotely and the poor person at the front line doesn't know that person, really doesn't want to compromise their career chances by telling them where to get off, they'll set up that supplier. Is suddenly an invoice arrives from that supplier, the invoice gets paid, and it's the next board meeting where someone says, why have we just paid this legal firm £40,000? Yeah. Well, we did it because when you were on holiday, you told us that you'd forgotten to set them up.
I can give you another example on that type of spoofing. Is I suppose this is for the more larger corporation where there's multiple employees, like you've touched on, and perhaps the accounts don't want to necessarily jeopardize themselves individually. But again, scammers were aware that the managing director, was away on holiday, and they'd duplicated his iPhone or email and sent a text message to the accounts. Hi, sorry, I forgot to do this before I went away. I needed to set up some new suppliers on our system and pay them X, Y, Z. And the accounts person at the other end, there was dialogue between them on text. That individual didn't want to disturb them on the holiday though, so I thought, I'm not going to phone them. Went through the chat and ultimately set up various accounts, and there was $60,000 down by the time he got back from holiday.
Oh, ouch. Yes, and it's embarrassing for everybody concerned, but that's a lot of money. It gets more sophisticated when we get into what I would term true invoice hijack, which is where the fraudster is actually able to insert themselves into the dialogue between supplier and customer. And what that enables them to do is they can just subvert that process and start diverting funds.
So this is more technology. As well as the cyber attack itself, is utilizing the technology.
It's using the technology and the process against them. So that makes it particularly scary, because if you think about how cybersecurity usually works, is it's scanning incoming traffic. it's very difficult to scan for something that looks like, sounds like, and behaves like the very thing you are expecting to happen. So if you receive an email from your existing supplier contact about a subject you are expecting to contact you about using the right words, the right terms, and everything else, is any technology scan is going to allow that through.
Yeah.
And so it's down to then the human on the other side of it to deal with it. These are no longer people. So the Nigerian prince, the numbers game actors, if you like, are people who are amateurs, enthusiastic amateurs in their back bedrooms, operate a numbers game. These are genuinely organized crime gangs. These there's an article on our website about the FBI managed to crack a gang in 2018. I think it's 72 people who they managed to get hold of.
Really?
And that was across Nigeria, Canada, and the US.
So worldwide.
Worldwide. And it's diverting funds off, and it's diverting a lot of them. Is the sum of money that they were able to recover is significant. It went into many millions of dollars. But when you think that many billions of dollars are being taken,
it's a drop.
It's a drop in the ocean. So the attackers are targeting not necessarily you. Attackers are targeting people who have customers, because if they can find the people who have customers, they can get to those customers, and it's the customers that lose. And what that means from a security perspective is, from a cyber attack point of view, you become only as secure as your least vigilant supplier, because they're evading your measures for security.
So the accounts payable team, obvious target in this, but I suspect they're vulnerable for other reasons as well, not just the fact that they handle the money.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple challenges for the accounts payable function. In the first instance, they've got to be efficient in the way that they process invoices. I mean, crikey, we're paying money out to begin with. Is spending more money on paying people, it's not generating more value into the business. So actually being efficient is a major challenge for an accounts payable team. Secondly, is those invoices have to be processed accurately and in a timely manner. And if you're getting detailed invoices from 100, 200, 300, hundreds of suppliers, then each one has to be validated, it goes through that process, goes through to authorization. But if suppliers are giving you incentives for prompt payment, that might need to be processed in 10, 15, 30 days before it starts incurring additional cost for late payment. And as we've just mentioned, criminals are becoming increasingly adept at subverting their process through invoice hijack. So there's multiple pressures that the accounts payable function experience. And if we look at a typical accounts payable workflow, they all receive invoices from a variety of suppliers, and different suppliers will send invoices in different ways. So it might be on paper, it might be a PDF, it might be a Microsoft Office document. In bigger companies, it might be electronic invoicing via file. It has to be validated. So is it a known supplier, known activity? Is it the expected value? And some of that reconciliation can be pretty detailed before it's passed on to be authorized. If it doesn't validate, there's going to be queries. And some of those queries may come from suppliers, some may go to suppliers, and there may be ongoing queries within that process. Finally, it goes to make payment, and the documents are archived and it goes away. What the fraudsters have become incredibly skillful at doing is inserting themselves into the receipt of invoices, or actually the sending of invoices from suppliers, to then be able to get into the query process. And that, if you look at those compound pressures of busy people dealing with many invoices from many suppliers and dealing with many queries are inconvenient. They need to be resolved quickly. If you can be credible in that query process, then there's an awful lot that can be done to subvert that process.
It's a double-edged sword in that sense, isn't it? They're getting in front end, but then also
Yep.
managing the process itself and behind the scenes. So we can see where obviously there's a massive opportunity here for them. So how do they actually do it?
Well, this is a scam, a business email compromise scam that IBM's technology fraud team detected and assessed late 2017, early 2018, but it follows a very common pattern. And what fraudsters do is they use publicly available company information to phish lots of contacts. So when I say phish is kind of, right, I want to get into this company, I want to target their customers, right? Who do I know, whose information's published online, what can I find on LinkedIn, what's the pattern of the email address, and so on. And then I can start sending them contacts and genuine looking emails. In this case, the break-in was targeting Microsoft 365 users. So very, very common, people who have desk-based Microsoft Outlook, but they also have a login for the web. And so what they did is they sent them a fake DocuSign link that they utilized to harvest the login credentials. So there's no malware, nothing that's going to show up on a scan here. This is a update your credentials on DocuSign and offer to use your Microsoft 365 details to log in. So immediately what they've done is anybody who fell for that, so that's the numbers game part of it, but you've then got the login to their email.
You've got the key.
You've got the key. So once they've got access to somebody's email, what they're then able to do is use the company address book to find the accounts receivable contacts within the organization. They then follow a similar way to then compromise those email accounts. Once they're into those email accounts, they can see the patterns of communication, language, process to start setting up some timing. In this particular case, attackers were really clever. What they did is they concealed their work by setting up email rules. So emails that they sent weren't spotted by the person whose email account they were in. Nice. And any replies to those emails bypassed the inbox and went straight into dedicated folders. So again, the attackers were able to sit in there for a period of time while they were doing the research, setting up patterns. What that afforded them was a period of time to create the sting. And so the sting in this respect was an email from a genuine contact, creating a credible reason for changing the bank details on the invoice that was already out there. So this could be as simple as, our bank account has been hacked, please do not pay any outstanding invoices. Well, that's credible. That's a good reason to contact you, isn't it? And
as a business, you would do that. You would, well, if we can keep hold of the money for a little bit longer, fine.
Yep. A few days later, the all clear is given. We've resolved the problem, but to be doubly secure, we've changed the bank account. So could you make your payment into this bank account? And again, they've created a sense of jeopardy. They've taken it away. And the accounts payable team in clients pay the money. Payment was made to the new bank account, which actually belonged to the fraudster. Once the payment's received in there, it's bounced through several bank accounts, and it's nigh on impossible to recover. So when we talked to a few security experts and fraud experts and accounts payable teams about this scam and how they would do it, and one of the first things that somebody said was, well, what we could do is we could introduce a rule in here, which is if we receive any request to change bank details, we'll make a phone call to verify it. And we looked at this, and then I pointed out that I can set up a non-geographic telephone number or a regional or a dedicated regional telephone number for less than £10 a month in the UK. I can divert that number to anywhere that I like. So actually, if I'm sat in the setup stage for a couple of weeks planning this, why wouldn't I email a few days before the sting to update the contact details on file?
So they're intercepting that aspect as well. So
Yep.
bring it all
So
together.
so these are clever people, and because they know the process and they know the measures that will be put in to protect it, they just subvert them in some way. Other ways that they get round that is, instead of sending the contact details update to the accounts payable function, they do it to the client contact. And so the client contact then sends that to the account payable function. And so again, you've got double layer of trust there. It's come from a credible source within the supplier. It's come from the buyer within is it all creates that human element of trust.
It's a bit like a magician's trick, I suppose, isn't it? They get your attention, divert it with one hand, and then take from the other. And in that respect,
precisely. It's using human nature and the fact that we behave in particular ways when we are working quickly. So the solution is, where possible, automate it. If as a human, we're in that mode where we're running a process that makes us feel like a robot, i.e. we're following strict rules, we're very easy to manipulate by a fraudster. Robots are actually not that easy to defraud. Is they will spot a spoof email because they read an email address very different. vaultconnect.co.uk looks very much like vau1tconnect.co.uk to the human eye. Looks it's a simple 1 or a 0. It either it is or it isn't to a robot. So spoofing doesn't work there. And by managing that automation, that then frees up humans to do what they're good at, which is use their judgment. By removing critical parts of the process away from email, you've then removed a big opportunity for the fraudster. So other measures that people should take, and it is surprising how few organizations do this, but also use two-factor authentication for login to email. A lot of people don't use it because it's inconvenient, but what it does do is it means that the person who is logging into that email actually has to have something else that isn't their credentials with them at the time that they log into it. So protecting the email element of it is absolutely crucial. And if we know that actually it's likely to be in the query process that fraudsters operate, is remove that totally out of reach of the fraudster. And again, the fraudsters are still carrying out a numbers game. They are looking at common rules in common processes and subverting those.
So they're looking for low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit. So if you've got a process that is different, you have a layer of protection already, because it's much, much harder to defraud you. And if they're in a supplier targeting that supplier's client contacts, is you being the most difficult means, well, actually, is that just focus on the others?
Yeah.
So that's how it does. So when we tackle these, so the first thing that we do is we look at automated document receipt and capture. If you can do that, you remove the human acting like a robot, and you've actually got technology doing that piece. Because then what you can have is you can have automated workflow, so you follow strict rules that the human can't be tricked into not following. So take our CEO fraud bit, is that straight away is an exception. It has to come out into human judgment, and humans are operating in an environment then where they're not having to do it quickly.
You're freeing up the time.
Yeah,
as well.
On a number of clicks per hour kind of productivity model is, okay, they are able to make that human judgment. Again, rule-driven approvals, if it's an exact match, you can approve it. You take away 80% of the workload straight away, leaving the exceptions to be dealt with by humans and good process. The information is passed into systems and you can see what's going on within the process. But most importantly is we take the query process out of email exchange. So all bank details are uploaded directly by supplier into a secure vault where only they can edit bank details. That takes that opportunity to have those bank details sent by email out of the equation. Because that workflow is tracked, you can see who's doing what, and you can lock everything down. That then removes the opportunity for a whole piece of the pie within there. So in summary, if we're looking at Invoice Hijack, if things like the corporate network are difficult to hack, fraudsters attack people and process, because quite frankly, it's the soft interface that
they're trying to make it as simple as they can for themselves, aren't they?
And as Nick from Nexus Protect said in our previous webinar, is that's usually the easiest way in. So yeah, when we talked about how he mimics attack when he's penetration testing, is he always goes for humans, always, and typically it's email as the tool that he uses. Common processes are easy to subvert. So if the process that's used in one company is very similar to a process in another company, you can, once you've worked out how to hack it once,
you can do it on multiple levels.
You can do it on multiple levels. And then what that means is one supplier could unlock 50, 100 clients. And then it's a numbers game, and you only need, you only need 3 or 4 of those to do it, and you could be walking away with 6-figure sum bounced out of the account. So it's a very lucrative way of generating cash. Because it's so lucrative, the techniques are sophisticated. But as we say, technologically, they're not that difficult. If you can harvest someone's login credentials, you can get into their email account. If you can get into their email account, you can see everything that's going on in that dialogue. One of the things that IBM highlight in the scam that we've done is they used patterns of language that have been used in previous conversations with that contact.
So that is taking it to the next level, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's, when they start mimicking the actual language that you're using, then you can see it's been going, obviously the engineering side of things has been going on for some time.
Yeah, so they are sophisticated and they're really not that difficult. And the answer lies in understanding the weak points in the process and addressing them, and understanding that you're not necessarily targeted in the attack. It's the supplier is the route to you. The very fact that you have suppliers who you have to pay every month, and it's frequent suppliers, overseas suppliers, absolutely, where we're both based in the north of England. If we've got customers in the north of England, we've probably got a very personal relationship with them. That's difficult to mimic. If I've got a supplier in China, I may have an email relationship with that person, but I may not have the personal relationship, and it's probably not that unexpected to have a different person involved in the transaction. So again, that starts to create opportunity for the fraudster to insert themselves into that process. And we come back to it, I think every webinar, is consider all 3 points of the triangle. Is profitability and efficiency, security and compliance, and being easy to do business with. If you can be 100% secure, but it costs you a lot of money and you're very difficult to do business with. If you take a balanced approach, you can actually tackle this as actually a productivity improvement exercise. If you go down, reduce the cost of processing invoices through automation. But then we've got the supplier experience to take into account, and the security. And I think you can never dial out 100% of risk.
It'll always be there.
Yeah,
it'll always be there. But like you say, it's factoring in the cost and the ability to trade. But certainly from business's point of view, you look at front end protection, you look at the culture within the business, and the training methods to help minimize the loss, and then protection measures. So through insurance, business continuity planning, disaster recovery, looking at each one of those and not just having it as a tick box exercise.
Yeah.
As we've talked about earlier, the fraudsters will typically go for the low hanging fruit. If you can establish just implementing various little little things here and there, they're probably likely to look elsewhere.
Yeah.
As to who to scam.
And I think it's one of the reasons that we kind of came together to put the cyber loss prevention forum together was increasingly we were seeing in organizations that it's cyber security, therefore it sits with the technology team or our outsourced IT provider. They can help you to a greater degree in terms of kind of getting corporate networks sorted and servers secure. But actually, unless somebody comes to them and tells them their processes, their operating model, and the business model, and they understand the risks around those, it's very difficult to actually be secure.
Yeah. It's how the employee interacts with that security. Mm-hmm. So like I say, you can have fantastic firewalls, antivirus, as you've established earlier. It's not necessarily that way that they're getting into the systems, but it's more through the supply chain. It's having that culture ingrained within the staff as part of a process that can help massively reduce loss. I mean, the risk will always be there. Mm-hmm. Hence why, obviously, myself as an insurance broker, we always promote making sure you prevent and protect.
Yep.
But if you can massively reduce that, the likelihood of a claim arising, then
and
the ultimate goal.
So some of it is risk assessment, some of it is education, make your people aware of the threats that they're faced with.
I'd say a high percentage education.
Yep. If people understand those threats, they're more likely to spot them.
Yep.
And they should, Nick from Nexus Protect in a previous event also said is people should be encouraged to volunteer their near misses. I nearly did this, or I may have inadvertently clicked on something with a almost zero consequence, because actually what that does is that promotes a culture of improvement,
teaching and learning.
So if you kind of focus in those areas, that tends to cover that off. But know the processes that are a threat and know the threats that target those processes. If you've got that, then at least you can be instructing security providers correctly, and you could be assessing the risk and the costs.
Yeah, very well. I think on that thing, what you need to look at is making sure from the top all the way down to the bottom, the business is engaged with it. So from the board level, it's not just necessarily, well, let's get a pen test done. It's why do we need that pen test done? What's this going to do? How are we going to filter that down through the employees? What are the measures of, once we've got the results of that, how are we going to implement the measures to reduce the risks and that side of things? So it's from the very top down to the bottom employee and making sure everyone's on board on that side. Yeah.
So, I mean, as you can guess, we've kind of got on our hobby horse here. But we've got a couple of questions that kind of come in.
Getting into mid-flow now.
We've got a couple of questions come in that I think are particularly pertinent to this. So, one of them, and thanks for this question because it's absolutely the right challenge to be making. The challenge that comes across clear is how am I going to get my suppliers to change their process? Well, there's a simple answer to that. You're probably not. One of the challenges for anybody who's kind of tried to put in kind of electronic invoicing is, every one of our businesses has a accounts receivable process that issues invoices in the most efficient way for us. And if you've got 200 suppliers, those processes are all different. Trying to get those suppliers to change their process just for you is a real challenge. I think if you're a Unilever or a major retailer, you might be able to get them to bend to your way of working. But if you're just a small, medium enterprise, you don't. And so what we're very, very careful about when we come and address this is actually don't try and change the way that suppliers work in the main part of the process. So the main part of the process is receiving invoices from you. The only part of the process to change is the queries piece. And if you think then you're dealing in a much, much smaller part of the process and a much more interactive area of the process. So if there's an invoice query, there's usually 2 humans involved in it somewhere. That's the perfect time to secure that process. It means that you can adopt a new process immediately without having to wait for those suppliers to come on board. And if you want more information about how we do that, I'd be very happy kind of to talk you through that offline. But yeah, no, it is a very good challenge. Is you aren't going to get suppliers to change just for you unless you are so important to them that they'll do anything to help you. We've got another one here, which is do we need to look at specific insurance covers around accounts payable?
Yes, very, very much so. I mean, when it comes to insurance, I think there's a misconception that certain policies will cover you, and people thinking that they're insured when they're potentially not. Cyber insurance is something you should look at very, very much so in terms of the levels of cover. Discuss with your broker what it is you require cover for, what are your risks, and then making sure you take out a policy with the right limits so it's fit for you. It's not a one policy fits all type of scenario. So in that sense, do your research yourself, speak to your broker, talk about what cover you require, and then making sure you get a policy from a reputable insurer as well, who you know will help and pay out in the event of a claim. I've seen a lot of incidents where people have taken out some level of cyber insurance. A certain type of incident happens, they're not covered for it. And it's I suppose in the same way as looking at cybersecurity, it's paying attention to the detail. It's not a tick box exercise to say yes, we've got a policy, but it's making sure a policy fits what you require.
Yep. And so another question that's just come in now is how important is Cyber Essentials? And I think Cyber Essentials is very important. It's a measure of how prepared your kind of network and processes are. There's a certain amount of self-declaration in there, so it is as important as the certification is your approach to getting certified. And having worked with a couple of clients recently who are going through there, they've paid, I think, polar opposite amounts to get certified. One absolutely required that certificate to go for tenders, so they looked at doing it at the quickest, most inexpensive way. And in doing that, they did surface some risks around their business, and they have been able to kind of close those gaps. Just going through that process is a useful exercise. The other client that we spoke to has spent multiples of that amount to get certified, but actually what they did is it incorporated a major test of their overall networks. They learned far more because they had an independent expert look at not just where their areas of risk were that needed to be closed, but the measures that they had got in place to cover risks that they'd identified were robust and effective. So Cyber Essentials is really important, but actually it's the approach to achieving Cyber Essentials that is almost more important.
There's that, and I would also say that Cyber Essentials it's a good stepping stone in terms of, like Rich said, there's a lot of self-assessment, so it's fantastic in that you achieve that, and it shows that there's some element of awareness within that company and the culture, but then obviously it's how you take it forward as well. So you look at Cyber Essentials Plus, and then I mean, it's relative to each company. So ISO 27001, things like that. It's a good stepping stone to go on to further development and protection.
Yeah, I'd say is ISO 27001, ISO 9001 can be a kind of an expensive and hefty process to go through, but coming through it, you kind of create a culture around quality and security. But if you just take some of the principles of ISO 27001 on board, such as regular risk assessment and reviewing those processes and the measures that you've got in place, that will get you a good way forward in things like, okay, I know that financial transactions will have a risk. Anything where I am exchanging personal information is a risk. And in both, there is an opportunity for fraudsters to get involved, to dupe someone into giving either money away or information away. If you isolate those processes and then look at, okay, what's the worst that could happen, and how do I control that risk? That is culturally a very good thing to do as a business.
gives you the credibility. And not only from having that as a good certification point, and like I just said, the culture within the company, it gives you it's a good sales tool. If you can show and say that you've got Cyber Essentials, you've then taken it further. We've looked at Cyber Essentials Plus, we've looked at ISO. It's a good selling point to your competitors that may not have that. Who are you going to deal with if you're a purchaser?
Excellent. So I think we are now the big hand on the watch.
Ticking.
It's coming around to 11:45, and we did promise that we would get you away on time this morning. So as we move past questions, as ever, we will be putting this webinar live to view on demand. It'll be on the Vault Connect website. It goes live on the RiskWorks website as well. So that has been Invoice, Hijack and CEO Fraud. If you have any questions that you didn't raise or that you would like to talk about afterwards, by all means, email Jonathan.
That's jonathan.d@riskworksbusiness.com.
Or email myself, richard@vaultconnect.co.uk. Many thanks, everybody.
Thank you for your time.